Hi and welcome to this introduction to Lumi32. This is going to show you what each of the functions in Lumi32 does, but it's not an exposure blending tutorial or an advanced tutorial. Now you'll see that these buttons are grayed out and so are the sliders when we first begin. That's because we need to create our masks first in order to access or activate these options. And we can create a mask with any of the buttons that aren't grayed out. Now these are presets, so we can press that and a Brights 1 mask will immediately give us a broad selection of the brighter parts of our image. A Brights 3 will give us a narrower selection, and Brights 5 an even narrower selection. Darks will do the opposite and select the darker tones, and midtones will do exactly as the name suggests. It will select the midtones. Above we have this dynamic histogram, which changes as we move our sliders. So it tells us exactly what is happening in the mask. The only slider that doesn't affect the histogram is the smoothness slider. Luminosity at the top here creates a mask based on the general brightness of the image, of all the color channels combined. But we have RGB here, red, green and blue. And if we press R, that's the red channel, that will give us a different selection. We can press green or blue. And each one offers a different selection. And within each one, we can still affect the mask by changing these sliders. Now we also can create saturation masks, and if we want, we can create masks in lab mode. Now the histogram doesn't work in saturation or lab mode. Now, let's go back to luminosity and we can look at zone pick. So if we press zone pick, this will give us 11 zones to choose from. And basically that means we can select a very, very narrow range of tones in our image for incredibly close control. So you see we've selected just a very limited portion of our image. And again, we can change that selection by altering the sliders. See, we can make that a more open selection. Interactive pick allows us to create our mask based on pointing and clicking. Now let's look at the sliders and see what they do. So I'm going to press Brights 1 just to reset back to a brighter mask. Now tone is basically the tones that we want to select in our image. So we have 255 selected here, which means we are selecting the brightest tones. If we slide the slider all the way to the left, you can see the histogram sliding with it. This means we are selecting the darker tones. 0 represents the darkest tones. Now the histogram, whatever's blue in the histogram is selected, whatever is green is partially selected, and whatever is red isn't selected at all. Now if we bring the tone along to the middle, this means we're selecting the midtones. So you can see we have some of the shadows here are darker, so less selected in the mask, and also the moon, which is bright, is now dark in this mask because we're selecting the midtones and not the highlights or shadows. Now if I reset that back to 255, I can make a much more targeted mask by changing the range. So the higher the range, the more open the mask. So if I bring the range all the way down to, let's say, 24, now we're only selecting the brightest parts of the image. If I bring it up to 68, we have a slightly more open mask. And again, all the way to 100, we have an open mask, fully open. Now the smoothness slider determines how smooth our mask is. So if we want to create a really contrasting mask, we can move that right. And this splits up the tones. And you see it makes the brighter areas brighter and the darker areas darker. We can move that back a little bit so it's not as strong. Or if we move it left, we create a much smoother gradient between all the tones. And often that can be really useful. Amplification, this will affect only the tones selected in the mask. So it will make the mask narrower, but it'll only select or affect the highlights and the upper midtones. So it'll make those tones much brighter. And you can see that change in the histogram. There you go. But it's not affecting the shadows. It's brightening up those areas that are selected in the mask already. Now all of these buttons are 100% customizable. So if we hold down our left mouse button for 3 seconds on any of the buttons, we get this prompt. And we can call it whatever we want. We can call it really bright. Press OK, and now that button is called really bright, and that preset is saved forever. So we can close Photoshop, we can be working on different images, and this will always say really bright, and it will always bring back these values for each of these sliders. So you'll be able to get that mask again. And if you're in R or G or B channels, exactly the same thing will happen. The channel is also saved when you create this preset. And if you want to reset that, we can just press resets. Now, if you don't want to reset all of these buttons, you can go to the support page for Lumi32 and you can see the original values for each one, and you just need to copy and paste those values. Now, let me delete this layer. There's something quite important that I need to point out. Because this is a hybrid plugin panel, that means unlike Instamask or other panels, we can't close the panel and then open it up and just carry on working like we did before. So what I mean by that is we've created a Lumi32 temp layer and we can change it just as we've been doing. But if I close the panel, look what happens. It's now become deactivated because we've closed that session. And so we've got this layer, but we can't do anything with it. So we have to delete that layer now to start again. And sometimes we might get a warning which says we need to close the panel properly. So if you want to see the parts of your image that are hidden by Lumi32, you can just snap Lumi32 off like this and can continue working. If you want to attach it back to that same spot, you should cancel your work and just put it back in the docking area there. Now the bottom options here we have select, apply, image, channel, curves, photo filter, hue, saturation and levels. And these bottom four are pretty self-explanatory. If we press curves, the mask will be applied to a curves layer and we can affect the curves layer any way we want. Or if we press PHFI, that's photo filter, we'll get a photo filter layer, hue saturation layer or a levels layer. Now select means we'll have an active selection with the mask that we've created. So if we press select, you can see we now have marching ants. And we can deselect that by pressing Ctrl and D or Command and D on a Mac. Apply will apply the mask to the layer below it. Okay, so you see we have this curves layer already with a mask on it. Well, let's go to a darks one and press apply, and now it replaces that mask and we've got a darks one mask on the curves layer. Image is a really cool function in that you could be working with an image and creating a mask and think, actually, this looks like it's quite a good monochrome image. I want to have this as a black and white photo instead. If you press image, it will convert the mask into a black and white photo, a black and white layer here, which can be saved as a normal image. And finally, channel will save your mask as a channel here, which you can retrieve anytime you want in the workflow. And so that is a basic rundown of Lumi32 and all of its functions.